college professor asked a janitor to solve an equation. What happened next left everyone in tears. The gym smelled of sweat and old leather. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, throwing long shadows across the mats. At the far end, a man in faded work clothes pushed a mop back and forth, the rhythm steady, almost meditative. His name was James Washington, 42 years old. To the students, he was nobody, just the janitor who came when training ended. But tonight training had gone late. And tonight, his silence was about to be broken. From the center of the mat stood Derek Mitchell, tall, broad-shouldered, his black belt tied tight around his waist. He thrived on attention, loved the sound of his own voice. His 8 students stood in a loose semicircle, sweaty from drills, watching their sensei with admiration. Derek's eyes found James. A smirk curled across his face. "Hey, you there with the mop," Derek called loud enough for the whole room. "How about a quick demonstration? Ever seen a real fight in your life?" The mop stilled. James lifted his head slowly, his calm gaze locking onto Derek. "I don't want to disturb your class, Sensei," he replied softly. "Just finishing my work." Derek laughed, a booming theatrical laugh that echoed off the gym walls. The students laughed too, some nervously, some eagerly, happy to follow their teacher's lead. "Oh, look at this," Derek mocked, pacing the mat like a showman. The janitor's afraid to step onto the mat, afraid to get his shoes dirty. James went back to scrubbing, his face unreadable. But inside something stirred. Something he had buried for 20 years. "Come on, man. Just 5 minutes," Derek pressed, his grin sharp. "Show them the difference between someone who trains and someone who just cleans." The students shifted uncomfortably. One young woman, Sarah Chun, lowered her eyes, not liking where this was going. Still she stayed silent. James gripped the mop handle tighter. He had heard words like these before. 20 years ago, in a ring filled with lights and roaring crowds. Words that had pushed him too far and cost him everything. "I said," Derek raised his voice, "come show my students what a real loser looks like." Nervous laughter rippled through the room. The janitor's silence only seemed to fuel Derek's arrogance. James set the mop down. The bucket water rippled, disturbed by the sudden stillness. He stood slowly, his back straightening in a way that made several students glance at each other. There was a quiet authority in his movement, something subtle but undeniable. "All right," James said at last. His voice was calm, but it carried weight, like thunder before a storm. "But when this is over, Sensei, you will apologize. Not to me. To them." Derek blinked, thrown for just a second. Then he barked out a laugh, covering the flicker of unease in his chest. "Apologize? Oh, you'll be the one apologizing, to the floor." The students chuckled nervously, but Sarah Chun felt a chill. Something in the janitor's eyes was different now. Steady, sharp, alive. And though no one else knew it, they were about to witness the return of a man the world had once called Silent Storm. The gym grew strangely quiet. Only the faint buzzing of the fluorescent lights filled the air. 8 students shifted uneasily as Derek Mitchell clapped his hands. "Gather around, everyone," he barked. "You're about to see why respect for hierarchy matters in martial arts." The students obeyed, forming a semicircle around the mat. Some looked curious, others uncomfortable. 1 or 2 whispered to each other, their eyes darting toward James. James Washington stood motionless, his rough hands hanging loosely at his sides. The faded work shirt clung to his chest, damp with sweat from mopping. Yet there was something about the way he held himself, something steady, unshaken. Sarah Chun felt it most. Her heart pounded, her breath shallow. She had spent years studying body language in sports. The janitor's posture didn't belong to a man who had never trained. It belonged to a fighter. "Look closely," Derek announced, his voice dripping arrogance. "Here's a man who never learned discipline, never set foot on a mat. His place is cleaning floors, not stepping onto them." Few students chuckled nervously, but others glanced at one another, uneasy. They weren't sure if this was teaching or bullying. James closed his eyes briefly. A memory flashed before him. Las Vegas 22 years ago. The roar of the crowd, the blinding lights, and the hateful voice that pierced it all. Look at that little black guy. He won't last 3 rounds. James clenched his jaw. Back then he had proved them wrong. But the cost of victory had been higher than anyone knew. He remembered the moment clearly. Sparring session. His best friend Tony Hammer Rodriguez, grinning beneath the gloves. Then a slip, a fall, the sharp crack of skull against canvas. Silence. Panic. And then, nothing. Tony never got up. The world called it an accident. James knew better. He had lost control. That night, he had sworn never to fight again. Never to let the storm inside him rise. Derek's mocking voice yanked him back. "So, janitor," he sneered. "Show my students a basic guard. Or is that too complicated for a man with a mop?" Laughter rippled across the gym again. But James didn't move. Not yet. Sarah spoke up suddenly, her voice trembling but firm. "Sensei, maybe this isn't necessary. We should continue training." Derek turned on her, his eyes narrowing. "Sarah-chan, are you questioning my teaching methods?" The room went silent. The authority in Derek's tone was sharp, cutting. Sarah lowered her gaze, but her fists clenched at her sides. James saw it, the same courage he once saw in his younger sister Kesha. Kesha, who had refused to accept injustice. Kesha, who had died at 17, taken by a stray bullet. Something inside James cracked open. He looked at Sarah, then at Derek. And for the first time in 20 years, Silent Storm Washington began to resurface. James stepped forward, his movements fluid, controlled. It was subtle, so subtle most students didn't notice. But Derek felt it. A prickle of unease ran down his spine. "All right," James said quietly. "But when this is done, Sensei, you will apologize. To her, to your students, and to yourself." The words hit like stones dropped in still water. The ripples spread through the gym. Even the nervous laughter stopped. Derek forced a smirk, though his stomach twisted. "Apologize. You'll be begging for forgiveness when you hit the floor." But deep inside he already knew. Something was about to happen that no amount of training could prepare him for. The gym felt colder. The air itself seemed to tighten, as if it understood what was about to happen. Students leaned in, their sneakers squeaking faintly against the polished floor. James Washington stepped slowly onto the mat, each step deliberate, each step steady. For 20 years, he had avoided this ground. But tonight destiny dragged him back. He untucked his faded shirt, folded it neatly, and placed it on the corner bench. The thin cotton undershirt beneath revealed scars, long pale marks across his ribs and shoulder. The kind only fighters carried. Sarah's breath caught. She recognized them instantly. Not janitor scars. Warrior scars. Derek stretched, rolling his shoulders, making a show of it. He raised his voice, playing to the students. "Now watch carefully. This is how discipline conquers weakness." The students chuckled nervously, but their eyes weren't on him anymore. They were locked on James. On the way his body shifted, grounded, balanced. Not stiff. Not awkward. Just a natural. Derek noticed too, though he refused to admit it. Something about the janitor's stance tugged at his instincts, whispering warnings he didn't want to hear. James inhaled deeply. His chest rose, then fell, slow, measured like a tide. Inside his mind, the past roared back. The stadium lights, the sound of gloves colliding, the blood, the silence when Tony fell. His heart hammered, but this time he did not run. He let the storm rise, but guided it, controlled. His eyes lifted, locking onto Derek's. They weren't the eyes of a janitor anymore. They were the eyes of a predator. Ready. Derek asked, smirking though his throat felt dry. James simply nodded. Derek lunged first. Fast, sharp, aiming to embarrass. A straight jab meant to sting, not injure. The students leaned forward expecting impact. But James moved. Effortless. Like water sliding past stone. He sidestepped, his feet whispering across the mat, and Derek's fist struck nothing but air. The shift was so clean, so fluid that several students gasped. James didn't counter. He didn't need to. He simply turned his head, eyes calm, as if studying a child throwing a tantrum. The silence was deafening. "What was that?" whispered one student. I didn't even see him move," another replied. Sarah's hands tightened around her notebook. She had studied martial arts for years, but she had never seen such economy of motion. It was perfect control. Derek tried to laugh it off. "Lucky," he said loudly. "Don't get too proud, janitor." But his pulse was racing, because deep down he knew that hadn't been luck. James straightened slowly, his voice calm. "Fighting isn't about pride. It's about survival. And survival isn't kind to arrogance." The words sank into the room like thunder rolling across mountains. Derek's jaw tightened. He charged again, this time faster, sharper, with a spinning kick aimed high. The kind of move that earned applause during tournaments. The students flinched, expecting impact. But again, James flowed like water. He ducked low, pivoted, and Derek's legs sliced the air harmlessly. James rose behind him, standing steady, unmoved. The janitor had not thrown a single strike. Yet he was already winning. Derek's breathing grew heavier. Sweat dripped down his temples, stinging his eyes. This was supposed to be easy. An old janitor, untrained, humiliated in front of his students. But humiliation had shifted. Not toward James, but toward Derek himself. Again, Derek barked, charging forward with a flurry of punches. Each strike sharp, practiced, powerful. James moved like mist in the wind. Every punch cut nothing but air. Every kick slid past harmlessly. The students stared, jaws tight, hearts racing. It wasn't a fight. It was a lesson. Frustrated, Derek snarled. "Stand still, you coward." He swung wide, a reckless hook. And in that instant, his balance faltered. James saw it. He had seen it 1,000 times before. The mistake that separated fighters from pretenders. Time slowed. The storm inside him surged forward. For 20 years he had buried it. But tonight he let it rise. With a single pivot, James stepped inside Derek's guard. His fist shot upward, not hard but precise. A lightning-fast palm strike to Derek's chest. The sound echoed. Lump. Derek stumbled back 3 steps, air whooshing out of his lungs. The students gasped. The gym shook with silence. James hadn't even looked angry. His expression remained calm, steady, controlled. One strike. And the black belt looked shaken for the first time. "Did you see that?" one student whispered. "He barely touched him. But he nearly knocked him down," another finished. Sarah's eyes widened. Her heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't luck. This wasn't chance. This was mastery. The man mopping floors had just revealed himself as something else entirely. Derek's smirk faltered. His lungs burned as he tried to steady his breath. For the first time his students saw it. Fear flickering in their teacher's eyes. He forced a laugh, shaky, strained. "Lucky shot," he rasped. "Try that again, old man." But James didn't move forward. Instead, he lowered his hands slightly. His voice calm but cutting. "Martial arts isn't about showing off. It's about control. You've spent years teaching them arrogance. Now let me teach them truth." The students leaned in, their loyalty shifting silently. Respect no longer belonged to the black belt at the center. It had moved. To the janitor standing calm, unshaken, unmoved. Sarah's lips parted, barely a whisper escaping. "Who is he?" James didn't answer. Not yet. But the storm was awake now. And it wasn't going back to sleep. Derek's chest heaved as he steadied himself. His pride burned hotter than the sting in his ribs. A janitor, had struck him down in front of his students. His face twisted with rage. "No more games," he growled. "You think one lucky hit means anything? I'll show you what a real martial artist is." He lunged forward with a roar, fists blurring in a furious combination. Left, right, elbow, kick. Every strike meant to overwhelm, to crush. The students gasped, stepping back as the air cracked with each strike. It looked like a storm of violence. But James moved with serenity. Each punch missed by inches. Each kick brushed past empty air. James didn't fight like a man. He fought like water, flowing, effortless, untouchable. His feet whispered across the mat, precise, grounded. His torso shifted just enough to slip past every blow. And his eyes, calm, steady, unblinking, never left Derek. To the students it looked unreal, like watching a predator toy with its prey, without even baring its teeth. Sarah clutched her notebook against her chest, whispering, "He's not defending, he's controlling him." Another student frowned. "But how? Derek's faster, stronger." "No," Sarah interrupted, shaking her head. "Not faster. Not stronger. Smarter. Sharper. Every move he makes, the janitor sees it before it happens." Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Derek swung wide, a desperate hook. James slipped beneath it, and with surgical precision, tapped Derek's wrist with 2 fingers. The black belt's hand spasmed, pain shooting up his arm. He gasped, clutching his wrist, staggering back. Before he could recover, James stepped in again. A single, sharp elbow strike to Derek's ribs. Derek wheezed, air exploding from his lungs. The students recoiled, wide-eyed. One strike, one breath, one lesson. The room froze. Even the buzzing lights seemed to quiet down. Derek hunched forward, one hand gripping his side, his breath ragged. His pride bled faster than his pain. James stood tall, his stance loose, relaxed. Not proud, not mocking, just steady. He spoke softly, his voice carrying more weight than a shout. "You teach them to fight for applause. I fight to protect life. That's the difference between us." The words struck harder than his fists, and for the first time the students saw it clearly, who the true master in the room was. Derek's lungs burned, his ribs ached, his pride lay shattered. But the laughter, the invisible laughter of failure, echoed louder in his head than the pain in his body. He could see it in his students' eyes. Disappointment, even pity. Pity for a black belt. That was worse than any injury. "No," he muttered through gritted teeth. "I won't let him humiliate me. Not here. Not in front of them." James stood calmly in the center of the mat, his breathing slow and controlled. To him the fight was already over. But Derek's storm hadn't passed. He crouched low, teeth bared, veins bulging across his forehead. The black belt wasn't thinking like a martial artist anymore. He was thinking like a cornered animal. And cornered animals are dangerous. He screamed, a primal roar that shook the gym. Every student flinched. Sarah whispered, "He's lost control." Derek charged. A full-bodied tackle, arms spread wide like a linebacker, aiming to crush James with sheer force. The floor trembled under his sprint. His roar filled the air with panic and fury. The students gasped, stepping back to avoid the impact. For a moment, it felt like the whole gym was about to collapse into chaos. But James didn't flinch. He stood as if rooted to the earth, his eyes locked on the incoming storm. His chest rose with a single deep breath. And then he moved, not fast, not frantic, but with the stillness of a man who had walked this road 1,000 times before. He sidestepped at the perfect moment. One hand caught Derek's wrist. The other redirected his momentum. The sound was thunderous. Derek crashed onto the mat, face first, the weight of his own fury slamming him harder than any opponent ever had. The floor shook. The students froze. Silence. Pure ringing silence. James stood over him, calm, composed. His grip still gentle but unbreakable. He leaned down, voice low yet commanding. Strength without discipline destroys the man who wields it. Derek groaned, pinned by his own mistakes, unable to rise. The students stood in awe. Their teacher, the man who demanded respect through fear, lay broken before a janitor who hadn't even raised his voice. Sarah whispered, almost reverently, "He's not just fighting him. He's teaching all of us." James released Derek's arm, letting him collapse fully onto the mat. Then he turned to the students. His calm gaze swept over them, each pair of eyes caught in its weight. "Martial arts," he said, "is not about proving who is stronger. It's about proving who is wiser." The words carved themselves into the silence of the gym. And in that silence, every single student understood. The true black belt had never been Derek. The gym felt heavy. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Derek lay on the mat, his chest rising and falling, his face pressed into the cold surface. The mighty black belt, broken, humiliated. James stepped back, giving him space. No mockery, no celebration, just calm. He turned his gaze to the students, his voice low but carrying like thunder. "You've seen the truth. Power without humility is weakness. Skill without respect is failure." The students glanced at one another nervously. Some looked shocked, some looked relieved, but all of them understood. Their teacher had been exposed. Sarah whispered, almost trembling, I can't believe it. He's not just a janitor. He's something far greater." Her words carried what everyone felt but dared not say. Derek groaned, slowly lifting himself onto his knees. His face was flushed red, not just from the fall but from shame. His eyes darted around, desperate. Everywhere he looked, he saw disappointment, the trust of his students slipping from his grasp. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. What excuse could erase what they just witnessed? When James stepped closer, his presence commanding without aggression. "Derek," he said softly, yet every syllable struck like a bell. "You turned this dojo into a stage for your pride. Now, in front of your students, you will do what you should have done from the beginning." Derek blinked, confused. James' eyes narrowed slightly. "You will apologize." The word cut deeper than any strike. Apologize. A black belt. To a janitor. Derek's pride screamed inside him. His fists clenched, his body shook. But then he saw their faces. Students staring. Not with respect. Not with fear. But with judgment. His power over them was gone. Forever unless he bent. With a trembling breath, Derek lowered his head. His voice cracked. "I'm sorry." He forced the words out like poison. But James wasn't satisfied. "Not to me," he said. "To them. To the students you tried to teach fear instead of discipline." Derek's throat tightened. He looked at his students, their eyes piercing him like glass. "I apologize," he muttered, "for turning this place into a circus." His voice broke. And in that moment Derek Mitchell, the proud black belt, was stripped of every illusion of greatness he had built. James nodded once, his expression calm. "Humility is the first belt you earn. Without it, every rank is meaningless."